sin Senter for fremdragende forskningsutlysning i 2021. De fikk veldig god evaluering, men på grunn av finansielle utfordringer i Forskningsrådet så ble det store kutt også på denne finansieringen, og dermed så ble C-LaBL ett av 2 prosjekter som ikke fikk tildeling likevel. Etter signering av avtalen mellom Tromsø forskningsstiftelse og forskningsstiftelse så ble initiativtakerne invitert til å levere en nedskalert søknad til Tromsø forskningsstiftelse. Den ble evaluert av det faglige rådgivende utvalget og funnet veldig velskrevet og god, som man kanskje kan forvente fra et lingvistmiljø. Nå kommer de direkte fra pressebesøk på det nyoppstartede senteret, og vi kan ønske initiativtakerne bak C-LaBL velkommen. Det er professor Marit Westergaard, førsteamanuensis Natalia Mitrofanova, førsteamanuensis Vincent DeLuca og professor Øystein Vangsnes. Og de vil i tur og orden bidra til en presentasjon av dette prosjektet. Vær så god, Marit.
Now we're going to switch languages, and we will also talk about language. And I will first give a really brief introduction of our Center for Language, Brain and Learning, which we call C-LaBL for short. And then the others will give you a very brief taste of the research that we do. Let's see. Right. So language is an immensely complex human ability. And learning just one is already a major achievement. Yet, humans can learn several under the right conditions. Also, given global communication and migration, it's becoming increasingly common for people to have to learn new languages across the lifespan. And this has consequences for the languages that coexist in the brain and also for the brain itself. So in our center, we will study the effects of bi- and multilingualism on the languages that live in the same head, on the brains that house these languages, and on the learning and teaching of multiple languages. Now, our center is divided into 3 domains: language, brain, and learning. And these 3 domains are connected by a common research focus, which is linguistic distance. That is, we study how the effect of multilingualism is modulated by whether the languages living in the same head are very similar to each other, for example, Ukrainian and Polish, or different Norwegian dialects, or very different from each other, for example, English and Mandarin, or Norwegian and Sami. Now, in this world map, Norway is the center of the world, and Tromsø is the center of the world. And in fact, Norway is an ideal context to do the kind of work we do, because we have a unique dialect situation here, we have several indigenous languages, English is everywhere, and there are more than 300 immigrant languages that are learned as the first language of children growing up in this country. But we will not only be working in our Norwegian lab, we also have a big network of international collaborators with whom we will do joint studies and thereby increasing our focus on new languages and language combinations. Now, is the work that we do interesting for anybody else outside of linguistics? Well, our research does communicate with other adjacent fields, for example, cognitive science, psychology, education, neuroscience, and health more broadly. And we also have societal impact through our information and outreach services, for example, Bilingualism Matters and Flere språk til flere. And that is C-LaBL in a nutshell. So, Natalia.
Yes, and I will give you a brief smakebit of what we will do in the language domain. So as Marit mentioned, we are interested in what's happening to languages that occupy the same mind, right? And how do we do that? So how do they influence each other? And potentially, how do we learn novel languages based on what we already know? So one of the methods that we are using is an advanced method in psycholinguistics called the eye tracking. So eyes are very important for us, so we get a lot of information through vision, and eyes are also kind of a window into what's happening in our mind, how we are processing language. So our pupils dilate based on cognitive effort, and we are also kind of looking at different things depending on what we are thinking about. So a typical experiment for us is that a person is looking at different pictures on the screen, and while simultaneously listening to spoken language. For example, here a person is looking at two pictures, so one representing a boy in the process of building a tower, and another one representing a boy having already built a tower. And they're listening, for example, to an English sentence, "The boy constructed a tall tower." So the eye movements look like that. So they're very fast, so you can see these kind of lines. These are called saccades, and these are the fastest movements of our body, and the circles are the fixations, so what we are expecting while we are processing speech. And we can average kind of what people are looking at while they are listening to language. And what we find is so when we average across speakers of different languages, is that they interpret this sentence slightly differently, depending on the first language. So English native speakers on the graph here, so you can look at the red line that looks to the picture of the process of this action, and the blue line is the picture of the result of this action. And as you can see throughout the sentence, the looks are 50-50. So like both pictures are compatible with this sentence. However, the Norwegian speakers here, they really prefer looking at the process stage of the event when they listen to this English sentence. However, speakers of Polish and Russian as their first language, they prefer the opposite picture, they prefer the result. And this is dependent on the grammar of their native language, and that influences how they understand the English sentence. So turning now to the effects of the linguistic distance that Marit mentioned. So we know that it's in general easier to learn languages that are quite similar to what you already know. For example, Ukrainian children now learning Polish and Czech have an easier time than Ukrainian children now learning German and Norwegian. However, there are also subtle differences between even closely related languages. So for example, Ukrainian and Polish differ in how they talk about animals in the direct object position. So Ukrainian marks them similarly to how it marks humans, and Polish marks them as it marks inanimate objects like table or microphone. So what will happen then in this learning situation? So will Ukrainian children transfer their grammatical logic to Polish, or will they take the Polish logic into their Ukrainian? And what we find in this project that has just started is that this really depends on age. So younger children, 6 or 7-year-olds, they really take the new language pattern into their native language, whereas older children, like 12 and 13-year-olds, take the pattern or the logic of their first language into the new language. But we'll continue with this project, and we'll hear more from us about this in a second. So now, turning to the brain domain.
Thanks so much, Natalia. So, as Marit alluded to, it's not just the languages themselves that get affected when you speak multiple languages. It's actually the physical brain and some cognitive processes that have actually nothing to do with language. And that's really the focus of what we do in the brain domain of C-LaBL. So you might ask yourself, why should speaking multiple languages change your brain structure at all? It seems a bit odd, doesn't it? The idea is the following. The languages that you speak, be them 2, 3, or more, all have to be active. And that's just by virtue of communicative necessity. You're all listening to me speak English right now, but if your parents were to call and they happen to speak a different language than one I am, you need to effortlessly switch away from the language you're engaging with me in and use the other one. We do this many, many times a day, potentially, and this is cognitively demanding. But we have a little advantage that our brains are highly plastic. And we're able to make use of that adaptation or the plasticity of our brains to make them more effective and efficient at switching between languages. Now, interestingly, the same brain regions and networks that get used for controlling your languages are also used for a bunch of other processes that have nothing to do with language. Things like attention and memory are also implicated. So what we're trying to understand in our line of research is how this resolution of the language competition that we engage with on a daily basis might have an implication for completely non-linguistic properties. Now we can measure this in a variety of different ways. We have access to imaging centers, both MRI, and so hopefully none of you have been unfortunate enough to have to go through one of these in a hospital, but they are also useful for research and they can give you all sorts of wonderful information about the structure and function of the brain. And we also, a little closer to home, have a technique called electroencephalography, or EEG for short, which measures the electricity potential left over from brain activity. And the combination of those things can give us a much more holistic idea about how the brain is adapting to bilingual experience. Now, to give you a bit of a flavor of one of the projects we're working on, this is one that we've been going on with for about the past couple of years that wants to look at how bilingual experience and these brain adaptations that we're able to measure might actually affect the way our brains age. Now, after a certain point in time, our brains all start to degrade. This is unfortunately just a reality of life. And we don't have, at present, any decent pharmacological solutions to that. But we do have a way to preserve function a bit longer. And that's through several different types of lifestyle factors, be them exercise or education, diet, social network strength, among others. But there's a growing body of research that shows simply using multiple languages on a regular basis might also be an independent contributor to keeping your brain healthy as we age. So that's what we wanted to understand. How does speaking multiple languages contribute, and is it independent of some of these other lifestyle factors? Now, the way we did this, we took a cohort of Norwegian, English, multilingual participants from the Tromsø area. We give them very detailed questionnaires about their language background and other demographic factors, like how much they exercise, what their diet's like, etc. And then we put them in an EEG and see what their brain waves look like. Now, your brain's functional activity can be divided into different sections, up to and including alpha and theta activity. What those are isn't really important, but the important thing is that they're connected to various cognitive processes. For example, alpha's been connected to attention allocation, for instance, whereas theta has been linked to aspects of memory. Now, as we age, the power with which these brainwaves occur tends to degrade, and with it, so does our cognitive performance. So if we're able to keep the power a bit stronger, we have more resources available to us to keep doing the things we want to do as we age. Now, what we found in this study is that the more you speak multiple languages, controlling for these other lifestyle factors, the more preservation of that power you have. So it does seem to be that being bilingual is a good thing, but it's not just that, it's how much you use the languages that's the real kicker. So everyone keep using your additional languages. Now, of course, that's a wonderful finding, but how does this tie into syllable? In reality, it's still a very open question how the distances between languages affect these brain adaptations that we've been talking about here. And that's really on us to understand next. A small amount of research is showing that it might matter, but the ongoing question really remains. What is it, and how is it going to affect the adaptations? So please stay tuned. The research is ongoing.
So in the learning domain, Silval, we are going to look at the acquisition and learning and even teaching of multiple languages, exploiting the richness of the Norwegian language situation. I'm going to wrap up now with showing you one study which involved two very closely related varieties, namely dialects of Norwegian. And to brush up your grammar terminology now, we're going to talk about predictive adjectives, which in Norwegian, when you have an adjective predicated over a subject, it has to reflect certain properties, grammatical properties of that subject. It has to have the same gender, and in many varieties, including the standard ones, also number. It's what, if you paid attention in grammar in school, samsvarsbøying is what we're talking about here. So you have to say, bilen er brun, not bilen er brunt. And biladen brune, not biladen brun, in my dialect. But there is a difference. Northern Norwegian dialects happen to not care about the plural ending of particular adjectives. So you say, biladen brun, right? And since the guest of honor today is from Bergen, I should say that also in colloquial street Bergen dialect, traditionally there is no such plural agreement on the verb. So you can say, jentene var fin. But if you're a bit more posh, you might say, jentene var fine. And so we did in this study an EEG investigation of participants where we looked at how the brain responds to this grammatical difference depending on your own dialect type and amount of engagement with the other. And it so happens that there is a brain signal for ungrammaticality called P600. So 600 milliseconds after the grammar violation, there is increased brain activity. And we took a group from Western Norway, Sunnmøre, and a group from Northern Norway, and we fed them bokmål, where you should have this E in the plural. And what we found that both groups reacted to a gender violation, so bilen brunt, for instance, but only the Westerners reacted to bilene brun. The Northern Norwegians didn't care about that. So they no P600 effect for the Northern Norwegians here, right? So then we asked, don't they care even when they get their own dialect? So we gave them both bokmål and Northern Norwegian, so which had different, opposite grammatical properties. And again, we see a P600 effect for the gender violation, but same pattern for the plural, with or without the E at the end, whether it was bokmål or Northern Norwegian. So then, what's with Northern Norwegians? It turned out that this lack of effect was camouflaged by variation in the participant group. So, because we'd asked them about how much they engage with, be it bokmål or Northern Norwegian, and what we found was that the more they use bokmål, are engaged with bokmål, the stronger this lack of an E at the ending becomes. Whereas the more you're engaged with Nordnorsk, Northern Norwegian, the less of an effect you find when there's no E present in the particular adjective. So this tells us that, dealing with different dialects is basically the same as dealing with different languages. And you can also acquire another grammar through exposure and as we've seen in this case. So, takk for oss. Gitt mo min oftas. Paljon kiitoksia meistä. Og Natalia, tusen takk til Trond Moen for at vi får lov å gjøre så mye spennende forskning i året som kommer.